Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss my thoughts about the reports of Labour's proposals for benefits cuts after ministers have been holding meetings with backbench MPs to get their views, which is how we know what they are. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So, what's going to happen with in-work and out-of-work benefit systems? That is the question that's been hanging over millions of people's heads for a long time now. I said last year, really wasn't acceptable for Labour to not at least set out their parameters for benefits reforms, given that it was providing yet another source of emotional stress to some of the most vulnerable people in society. But the news initially was not at all bad. The Tory budget last spring had required cuts to benefits, which Labour cancelled when they won the election. Now, they didn't have to do that. They could have just, if they wanted to go along with that, they could have said, oh, well, it's in the Tory budget. Our budget's not out yet. It'll just sort of have to happen. And then we'll look at, implementing our version when we've worked it out. No, they cancelled it. They said, no, we're not doing this. Then the budget was announced. And although Labour had committed to cutting the welfare budget, all of the savings were linked to benefit fraud, not restricting access or cutting the value of payments. Rachel Reeves re-emphasised this just earlier this year. So at this point, there would be no changes for people in need of benefits. The major concern was things like what are the nature of the reforms? And we still don't know what reforms Labour are going to introduce, as they haven't been announced. I know one of the fears is, are they going to turn PIP into vouchers or something like that? There's no suggestion of that, but that's a fear. But recently, Keir Starmer and others have been clearly laying the groundwork for some bad news being announced. We still just didn't know what it was. So what changed? Well, Donald Trump, the OBR and short-sighted policies. First, what are Labour planning? Well, people have been asking me to comment on the rumours for some time. I wouldn't do that before today for a couple of reasons. First, misinformation can be quite lucrative for some media and social media grifters, but in this particular case can be quite harmful. The same people who are raising the alarm over the past couple of months and who are, by the way, still wrong. Because, people go, oh, but they were right. Says, no, they just talked about benefits cuts. Did they say exactly what they were? No, they did not. Or if they did, they weren't right about the nature of it. But they're also the same people who were saying that the Employment's Right bill was being watered down. It wasn't watered down, though, was it? It was actually strengthened. Some people just claim terrible things, good for clickbait. They know that if it turns out they're wrong, as long as they don't mention it, then no one will really remember what they said a few weeks ago anyway. And if they're right, they will carry on mentioning it to make sure you go, you see, I was right about this. That means I'll be right about the next thing. But in this particular case, many of the people affected are already in poverty. They're already emotionally under pressure. And I think telling them it's going to get worse in specific ways, which you do not know to be true, I think is just cruel. But the second reason is that we didn't actually know anything. You often get controversial policies leaked before the official announcement, like the rise in employers' national insurance, for example. We knew that was happening before the budget was announced. But for this, there was absolutely nothing at all. And that's not because there was no leaking going on. There's always leaking if there's information. It's because nothing had actually been decided. And in a sense, it still hasn't. If enough Labour MPs stand firm on this, there will be changes. And I'm not just saying that, ministers have basically, according to reports, hinted that they will have to change. They will have to. If it requires a vote, and one of the measures does require a vote, if Labour MPs say, well, we'll vote against it, they will have to change it. And I'm going to say this is one of those rare situations where Labour MPs should be prepared to vote against these changes. So what are the changes? Well, this is from reports. It's not an official announcement. Ministers have been talking to MPs to get their reactions, which is how we know. First, freezing personal independence payments. That means a cut in real terms. These are payments for people who have extra costs as a result of disabilities and so on. Most are on very low incomes. The money is often needed for things like extra energy costs. And, well, they're costs that are going up right now. Energy is going up again. A real terms cut would not be acceptable. The second is restricting access to some benefits. I gather this is centred around NEETs. These are people who are not in employment, educational training. It's young people up to their mid-20s. And Liz Kendall, who's the DWP minister, had been furiously trying to argue that the best way to get the welfare payments down over this 5-year period was remove the barriers to work, not make them worse. Because I mean, I'd have thought this was obvious enough anyway, but as someone who's had to rely on benefits myself in the past, if you make life harder, you make it harder to find a job. You know, when I was on benefits and I had no disabilities or anything, you know, just job seekers allowance, I couldn't afford everything. Like, so for example, in order to have car insurance so that I could apply for jobs that would need travel, I had to do without gas. It was that simple. There was no hot water. I did without that. Can't afford everything on benefits. Like any language which implies that people on benefits are being held back from the workplace because of golden handcuffs. Oh, it's because life's too good on benefits. Like it's obscenely untrue. The idea that the Tories, after 14 years, created this very generous benefit system is maddening. Ministers are complaining that there are too many people on benefits. Like, yes, there are. There will always be some who need to be, but there are absolutely too many people in the system. But this is not because they're languishing there. It's because, for example, the NHS has been unable to provide adequate diagnosis of treatment of late because sometimes transport is lacking. The economy's shrunk in real terms, but costs have gone up. Yes, under Labour, wages have been going up in real terms, including at the lower end, which is good, but they haven't caught up yet. Some of these barriers will naturally fall away as, for example, the NHS gets better, as Labour's promised mental health support for young people kicks in, as Kendall's work support programmes are rolled out, as transport gets better, as pay keeps rising. They will not fall away by squeezing the incomes of people already in poverty. You do that and it's like you're making it harder to get to work. It's like you squeeze people's incomes. Oh, I now can't afford the bus to go for that job interview, right? Or I can't afford the car insurance, like as in my case, to be able to have a car to get jobs for which I need to travel. You know, you're actually making it harder to get a job. Now, people who've watched this channel for a while will know where I stand on the role of backbench MPs. It is not to challenge the party, to make it harder for them to win the next election. All MPs, if you stand under a party's banner, you stand with that party. So you should absolutely vote with the leadership on manifesto promises and anything else that makes sense. But they should also stand up to the leadership if the voters are being conned. And this is one case. See, this is my argument. First, there was no indication that benefits would be restricted or cut in the manifesto. Indeed, there was no mention in the autumn budget either, suggesting it was never the plan. Second, although Reeves might argue that it was a manifesto promise to balance the books, and they're doing this to balance the books which have now been thrown out of whack by Donald Trump's nonsense, this is not the only way to do it. So you can't just link those two things. You can't link it back to the manifesto because there are alternatives. She could meet the same outcome with a different policy. So they're choosing this as the path of least resistance. I would argue Labour MPs should stop it being the path of least resistance. Third, there are some things which Labour stand for which the public understand. One of them is being anti-poverty. This is not a policy which the public would have expected a Labour government to adopt, unless it had said so before the election. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about members of the public who are pro-Labour or anti-Labour or neutral. People in general in this country understand that a Labour government is unlikely to make poverty worse. That's not really what it does. I mean, if you take Tony Blair, for example, when he became Labour leader, Labour at the time were effectively contractually committed to renationalisation. He looked at it and said, no, too expensive. And he changed the party constitution to scrap the clause. But he also did it in such a way as to draw a lot of public attention to it. So from the public's point of view, the position was made clear before the election. So his government didn't act out of step with voter expectations. This policy would be outside of the expectations of a Labour government. So I see it as a con on the voters. I mean, if they means tested PIP, that would be better, although they'd need to make a better job of it than they did the winter fuel payments. The winter fuel payments was not, although, yes, they hadn't said they were going to do it before the election, but also they sort of probably didn't intend to either. The fact that they means tested it was not out of step with what you would expect a Labour government to do. The suggestion here is that it hits everyone. This is not only an attack on people's life chances, could lead to more people becoming destitute or worse. Doesn't matter if this is only intended as a stopgap until the economy improves and could just be for like a year. There are people affected who are already in absolute poverty. It's not morally right, but it's also not economically right either. It's literally creating an extra barrier to work when the government have identified one key economic challenge is getting more people into work. And Kendall has been arguing this. Like, I don't blame her. This is on Reeves, right? And the OBR. See, the idea of the OBR is quite a good one in theory. It was set up by the Conservatives, and it's maybe too inflexible in their modelling. See, Kendall has been trying to argue, look, here we've got support. We're going to invest in support programs to help people into work. As more people go into work and off benefits, the welfare bill will just naturally come down over these 5 years. And that all makes sense, and that's fine, and people will accept that. But the OBR can't model it. So they don't feel they can forecast the quantitative value of these work support schemes over this 5-year period, which may be fair enough. I mean, I'm not an economic modeler. I don't know. Maybe it is too hard to model. But what it means is Kendall cannot get computed to say yes to this savings on the basis of helping people into work and off benefits, even though it absolutely makes sense. You know, the OBR won't do that. What I think should happen, therefore, is Labour should look at some part of the budget for their 4th and 5th year plans and say, look, OK, we'll cut this. We're going to cut this, but just to make the figures add up for now, because the figures only add up over 5 years, remember. But we don't expect to have to carry it out because we think the economy will grow more than forecast. So just be open about that. Say we're going to announce this. It's technically a cut in the 4th and 5th year, but we don't expect to have to go ahead with it. And many of you will know I take a dim view of backbench MPs selfishly throwing their own government under the bus. Because, you know, and the thing is, they'll still be MPs. They're in all of these rebels. They're all in nice, safe seats. So they're going to have nice salaries and a good pension, even with the Tories in power. You know, too many of them do not actually care about why Labour in government. And even with this policy, remember, it's like an awful lot of what Labour are doing is really good and it's really going to help people. But this is something, if I were a Labour MP, I'm going to tell you, I would definitely vote against it and no threat would work against me. Right? Quite frankly, any threat to issue a 3-line whip for such a vote could only work anyway if there were only a few MPs willing to rebel. They all should. You can't remove Keir Starmer can't remove the whip from 200 MPs, right? I wouldn't even abstain. I would not even abstain. I would vote against it. The manifesto is full of references to support for disabled people. This does the opposite. Some of the other policies Labour have had, which I've disagreed with, were still in line with the election offer, so I would still have voted for them, despite personal disagreement. That is the whole point of being. If you stand under a party's banner, you are committing to doing that. It doesn't matter about your own personal beliefs. You state those in a debate, but you still vote with the party, right? But this is a case where Reeves and Starmer are conflicting with their own manifesto, and I do think Labour MPs should stand firm on it. I know key target voters don't care. This is not about electoral strategy, but Labour should. And ministers will not go ahead if backbenchers oppose it. I saw The Guardian reporting that dozens of Labour MPs could rebel against it. Pathetic. Should be all of them. Just like Tory MPs, think about the mess they made, right? They should have saved their own leadership from themselves. Look what happened with the Tory. I don't mean over austerity. You know a Tory MP is not going to vote against austerity. But the hard Brexit, that wasn't in line with Tory thinking. The asylum policies, again, was not. What happened? Because of the hard Brexit and their asylum policies, they created the problem they now have in the form of Nigel Farage and Reform UK. The Tory leaderships created that problem. Tory MPs should have saved their leadership from themselves. And there are situations where sometimes Labour MPs should save their leadership from themselves if they want to avoid the same mistake. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.